Hello everyone, my name is Gary and we are building another Zeepkist track. Today's track is a bit more devilish. It's a lot harder than my previous track. That's why the theming is a bit reddish, red colors and all such things. Things that are associated with devils or demons. I've also decided to add some Dutch words, and the track name is also in Dutch. It's Snelheidsduivel, which means speed demon. It's not really that speedy, but I thought maybe it's a good name. When I start building a track, I often start with the foundation. Foundation is great because you know how your track is gonna look like from the bottom. Plus, building a foundation will avoid floating track elements. Some people like it, some people don't. I personally like to put everything on the base plate because it makes it a lot more grounded. But floating tracks also are valid tracks. Something I also decide on early is the color palette. Deciding the color palette is hard, especially if you want to match every color perfectly. There is no perfect match, but you do want to have some cohesion. You don't want some colors to be too bright or too hard or too saturated, because then the whole vibe doesn't work. And that's why I also changed the skybox multiple times, because I want a certain vibe. I don't want everything to be too muted, too red. I do want to have some contrast. And that's also another thing you need to be careful of. If there's not enough contrast, it's really hard to see the track. When I manually scale things, like when I don't use a grid size, I use odd numbers. The reason is because when you increase the size of something, odd numbers will keep everything on the grid. I also often try some things, and when it doesn't pan out, I don't use it. So here I finish off laying the foundation so that I can continue decoing the rest of the track. One of the things I also did was replace every checkpoint. Here I'm making a portal. To correctly space them, I added a temporary roadblock. This will help me determine how I will need to space the portal. Later on, I will widen the portal a bit. This is because two checkpoints need to have a wider portal to work. After that, they're good to go. Now, the annoying thing about checkpoints is when you use these standalone checkpoints without the base, selecting things is a bit finicky. So sometimes I need to look up and then click the individual parts. So after some adjustments, the checkpoints are finally done and we can go on with the rest. So when doing the finishes, I first started with the risky finish. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but eventually I decided to do something akin to a worm or a tentacle, and it actually ended up becoming a recurring element in my track. While doing this, I did worry that I made the risky finish a bit more impossible to do, but it actually ended up helping it become more possible. I added a small hill to add a bit of terrain to break up the monotony, and added a few boulders, making it look like something was digging through the terrain. So here I'm making the risky finish sign. As I said earlier, it's in Dutch. It loosely translates to risky finish. Actually, it's a direct translation. I use the unlit paint so that the letters become more visible. And I used road pieces and rock pieces to make the sign. I wanted to make it look like an old signpost, so that's why I used road pieces, because there is a road piece that makes it look broken. I also added arrows to let people know where the risky finish was. And here is where I add more of these tentacles to make the finishes look more cohesive. I added mountains around the track to simplify decoing. That way I don't need to complicate decoing everything. It's just gonna be a bunch of cliffs and mountains. I just want to make sure that the horizon isn't visible. So what I'm doing now is I'm layering more cliffs and more mountains just to give it a bit more depth. I also make sure that it doesn't intersect the track. The last thing you want is to accidentally change the line of your track. So now that the horizon is done, I just need to add detail to the base plate. I'm mainly using those hill parts as is. I don't need to scale them up. All I want to do is just add some depth and add some details, and that's it. Finally, I use rocky walls as a complete base plate cover. In theory, I could have removed the base plate. I didn't in case I missed the spot. After that, I began adding foliage. In this case, just trees. Now it's time to finish up the finish. First, I wanted to add visual indicators without arrows. You generally want to do that because signs aren't the first thing people notice while racing. It's really fast-paced, so having a visual indicator in the form of deco might help you with pointing out where people need to go. That doesn't mean you don't need arrows. Arrows are still a great indicator. Also, don't forget to add the podium. From here, it's mostly fine-tuning, tweaking, and that also means actually riding your track. You'll only know if things are working if you actually ride your track. Sometimes you spot mistakes and you'll need to fix it. You don't have to fix it, but fixing mistakes is always great. For example, here I'm tweaking that jump. The main problem with that jump is it's really tight. So I decided to remove the barriers and tweak it a bit so that it looks natural. Like sometimes you just can't see where the issues lie by just going through the editor. You actually do need to ride your track to see what people actually see. Next, I'll insert my signature blueprints. Those are my username and of course my teddy bear. And since this is a more of a spooky track, I also added the spooky version of the baby hat. I actually added it twice. I also wanted to add an AFK route, so adding it there was also a bit appropriate. I also needed to cover up that AFK route, and then I needed to test it multiple times to see if it works as intended. What I wanted to do with this AFK route was I wanted to make it so that you wouldn't crash, you wouldn't time out. And here's the final track. It isn't really speedy. It's difficult, it's hard. In this part, you have to make sure you don't go too far to the left because then you will actually fall off the track. You can do this without wall riding. I think you will lose speed. After this corner is a slightly hard part. It's not too hard, but you can overshoot it to the left or right, which is why I tweaked it a bit. But I don't think it should be too difficult to do. Next is a harder jump, which is why I added signage. I might have made it a bit too difficult, especially combined with the jump that comes next. Because if you don't have enough speed, you won't make the jump. So after the final jump, you have three choices. Either you go to the risky finish or you take one of the easier finishes. Naturally, I take the risky finish. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I'll post a link to the track in the description, as well as the link to the VOD where I created the basic layout. And I will post a link to the VOD where I made the background music, because I actually made this background music as well as the background music to the previous video. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. Maybe hit thumbs up, I don't know. I'm not gonna tell you what to do. And as always, see you again soon, and until next time.